to click. And so there really wasn't any way, they really hadn't thought through what it meant to have digital works in the gallery. Peter, now, if you do a search for his work, there's only one work that's claimed out of the 4 that we did with him, and that's a talking dolphin that went through the education department. And it was other institutions. Actually, in my role at Northern Lights, we got an NEA grant to make an app of Ding on Seek as a way to update it, which is available in the Apple Store. And we did other commissions, and I really point out on the McCoy's Air World and also even Frank Amato's Life Sharing. They're really critical works in early net art, and also they're being brought back by Rhizome right now. So these are important works in the sort of second stage history, I would say, of net art that were either commissioned or hosted or both by the Walker Arts Center. One of the things that, even though we were the digital Gallery 9, it was really critical to try and integrate or cross or have that intersection between the physical world and the virtual world, without our goal being specifically, like Gallery 1, to promote the galleries happening. So we worked with Lawrence Weiner on his really fantastic piece that he had on the front of the Walker for so long, and that became our homepage for a number of years, until the designers got at it and said, this is really not so easy to figure out which pieces represent what. But each of those words was a performing arts or visual arts or a different part of the museum. And it was a really beautiful interface. We also had programs that we initiated, like Shock of the View. And this was interesting as both a project that was looking at comparing physical works and digital works and trying to understand how they worked. It invited artists and curators from different institutions around the country over the course of 6 months to curate mini exhibitions, and then there was a listserv discussion. So this screen happens to show a work by John Frederick Kensett about Mount Hood in the Davis Museum collection. And then Peter Walsh selected a webcam of Mount Hood as his comparison. And with that idea, they were both sort of tourist imagery at the time. And I think it really brought home in a really fun way that notion that this fine art painting sitting in the museum, but at one time it was a way to get people out into the country and spend their money on, on trips and things like that. And then we commissioned an original artwork by Natalie Bookchin as a response to this going on. So there are all these layers of regular curators coming in, thinking about the connections between physical and virtual works of art, having artists respond, and then having a general listserv discussion about that. Another exhibition I did around 2000 was called Art Entertainment Network, and this was part of a couple of collaborations or parallel projects with Philippe Verne, who had curated an exhibition called Let's Entertain. And so the virtual version of that was essentially a portal. And before Google's search bar took over as the idea of portal, Yahoo and other sites would have long scrolling lists of information that you should need to know. And so we took that idea and filled it up with different projects. Every time you refreshed, you would get a different search engine. Here the screenshot is showing Rhizome. Another time it might be a Miko search engine. Another time it might be Mongrel search engine. Airworld is the advertising bar, but another time it might be Lynn Hirschman, Lisa, et cetera. So it was really this notion of taking how the contemporary culture was looking at the digital and putting the art wrapper on it, so to speak. But at the same time, we wanted to take that idea and what could we do in the galleries. So we commissioned Antenna Design to create a revolving portal that as you push this 8-foot high, 4-foot wide glass door around, there's an embedded screen, and every X degrees it would click into one of these new sites. And you could stop there and spend some time at it. Of course, it wasn't really that effective or interesting, but really trying to play off that notion of a portal both in virtual space and physical space. And there was also a symposium around the idea of EAT, which of course was entertainment, art, and technology, but also the early experiments at the Los Angeles Museum of Art around art and technology. We worked next with Philippe on a project. He curated a show called How Latitudes Become Form, or he and a group of curators. I was one of them, and we did a series of online exhibitions or online projects called Translocations. And again, couple of things I want to call out here. One is that we worked with Atelier Bow Wow, a really wonderful architectural practice out of Tokyo, as well as Rox Media Collective out of Delhi, who created what we talked a lot about what is the equivalent of Dan Graham's video viewing cube, and how could we create something like that for digital media. And so they came up with the idea of a temporary autonomous sarai. A sarai was a kind of place for disputation and discussion on the Silk Road that Rox brought to the table. And Atelier Bow Wow designed this set that was in the Walker lobby that would pack up into a shipping crate because people sort of be exposed, and you could have individual viewings, you could have group viewings of projected things, you could walk around it, and there was also an embedded artwork by Rox Media Collective. We also worked with Julie Moretu on an online mapping project with our youth program, and two other things. We started something called the Walker Channel at that point, where curators in 5 different time zones around the world, I don't remember them all now, but I think it was Johannesburg and Rio and Tokyo, were actually curating a selection of sound projects throughout the exhibition. 1 minute, all right. So, okay, that's what I thought. I think one of the really interesting things that the Walker has continued assiduously is this idea of a Walker channel. But this is when we had to sort of invent it. You couldn't just post it to YouTube and put up a schedule, et cetera. So those are some of the projects that we did. At the same time, in this role of doing everything that a museum does, we started a study collection. And that was really as a way at the time to think about how we could save some of this work that was being created. And so I hope you all know about AutoWeb. If you don't, it's truly one of the greatest artworks of the end of the 20th century, and it belongs in every textbook on contemporary art. And in a sort of one of those funny Silicon Valley sort of chains, at one point, the people who put out AutoWeb were bought by America Online, and they had no interest in it. So they were about to lose AutoWeb and called me up and said, would you be interested in taking it? And I said, yes, my favorite work in the world. And so we hosted it as the sort of the beginning, or one of the beginning projects of our art study collection, really thinking about this notion of what does a museum do well? It saves things forever in perpetuity. And there was a lot of debate, and we acknowledged that, and we worked with it. We invited 7 different people to write about this idea of mummifying a living artwork on the web. But in the end, we put it in the digital art study collection. And now, again, unless you know the URL, autoweb.walkerart.org, nothing in the Walker site points to it, so you can actually get it. So Robin has managed to save it up till now, but it's sort of being hidden. One thing I want to be super clear about is that being hidden isn't necessarily a dereliction of duty. So this Saul LeWitt was the wall drawing that was up when I was at the Walker. At a certain point, it became a Murakami wall panel, but the LeWitt is still sitting there in the collection. They're not getting rid of it. They're not destroying it. They're not selling it off. They're not giving it away. So there's certainly, an opportunity for storage. In 2003, Kathy Hallreich, the director then of the Walker, terminated the curatorial program of the Walker Arts Center. And I just want to read in part my response to that. The WUAC, I would argue, for better or worse, had become over the past 7 years an undeniable part of the new media digital net arts for brevity NMA ecosystem. Part of this was my passion, of course, but my practice was significantly and consciously situated within an institutional context. I did not and do not believe that mainstream art institutions should be viewed as some kind of pinnacle authority in relation to NMA. We only prove our value by doing things of value, not simply by being part of the establishment art world. At the same time, I believe that the institutions can have a useful and fruitful role in relation to NMA. Part of that belief is based on the value of longevity and commitment. An institution can potentially do things over time that are difficult and perhaps less interesting over time. So, 2 quick slides. Hallreich's response to that was, too bad about the curatorial program. We don't have as much money, but I'd like to assure everyone that we'll keep the works in Gallery 9 and the study collection accessible. I want to emphasize all of these works went through an acquisition process. They had contracts, they were approved by the director, they are approved by the board of directors. So they're not just sitting out there for some fantasy. And so I guess my ending question is, what is a museum's responsibility to history, its collection, the artists it supports, the community it engages, even if it is a digital museum, even if its objects are virtual? And my 2 takeaways: anyone who's thinking about the digital museum should think about its responsibilities and not just its opportunities. And anyone thinking about the digital museum should consider how it enhances its mission, not just its finances and marketing. That's it.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to Louise and everyone who's brought us here. It's amazing to be in a